But he knew he had to go out and get something bigger and better to bring home to his grandmother. But he knew that he couldn't find anything bigger and better than a walrus on the land. To find something bigger and better than that, you were going to have to look out at the sea and hope perhaps a cruise ship was going past. Certainly the creatures upon this cruise ship, after 13 or 14 days, they must be bigger than a big bull walrus. You call it a massacre, we call it subsistence. And in the end, you get a UN tribunal. So, he knew he had to look out into the water. So he went to a point of land that stuck out into the sea there, and he looked. And he looked. And that's when he saw it out there. He saw swimming out in the water out there a great big beluga. Oh, I'm sorry. Does it look good? Okay. He saw out there a great big beluga whale. Oh, a beluga whale! Oh, think of how happy grandmother would be if he brought home this beluga whale. I mean, this was a whale that was big enough not just to feed him and his grandmother and a couple of families for a couple of weeks. You could feed the entire village for a couple of weeks just from this one whale. Oh, but this would be great, but how is he going to get this whale? He knew that when the men went out hunting in their kayaks, they took along with them their great big whale's harpoons. And these harpoons were attached to great big long lines, and at the end of the big long lines there was these big seal floats, the seal skin that you blow up into a big balloon. And when they harpooned that whale, and the whale would dive down, then that big seal float would come along and be pulled down into the water. And if you could get 3 or 4 of these into the whale, this was wonderful because it would tire the whale out quicker. And that way it would die and not have to suffer as much. And then once the whale died, then those big seal floats would make sure that that whale did not sink down to the bottom of the sea, because you can imagine how angry the spirits would be if you wasted an entire whale. But he didn't have any of these things. He did not have his kayak with him, and he did not have a great big harpoon, and he didn't even have any seal floats that he could use. But grandmother did make sure that he brought with him some sinew rope, and so he started to pull that sinew rope out of his little bag. And he was pulling the sinew rope out of the bag, and he thought grandmother needs to get another hobby because she made way too much sinew rope here. And he took one end of the sinew rope and he tied it around his little harpoon, and then he took the other end of the sinew rope, and there was a great big rock or a great big boulder on that point of land, and he tied that around there, around that rock, and then he took his little harpoon and he stood there and he waited for just the right moment when that whale would come up for wait for just the right moment when that whale would come up for a bit. You guys might want to just lean to the side a little bit. This looks imaginary, but it still has to come. He waited for just the right moment when that whale came up for a breath of air, and when it did, boom! He got the Dr. Jack. And a harpoon wound on deck 3 aft. I don't know what code that is. It's red from here. So they got that great big beluga whale on the very first try. Now this was a great big beluga whale, and he only had a little harpoon. And when that little harpoon went into that big beluga whale, it wasn't like getting struck by a harpoon. It was like being stung by a mosquito. And it didn't hurt that big beluga whale, but it made that whale angry. And so the whale started to swim away, and it started to pull on that little harpoon, and the little harpoon started to pull on that sinew rope, and the sinew rope it started to pull on that great big boulder, and the boulder started to move. So that little boy who was not so little anymore. He went over and he stepped on that great big boulder so it wouldn't move away, and then he pushed down on that boulder so it wouldn't move away, and finally had to sit on the boulder so it wouldn't get pulled out into the sea. But that whale, it kept pulling and pulling and pulling until the entire point of land broke off and started floating out into the sea. Now, a few days ago, we didn't get to go ashore at Nunavak Island. But if you look at Nunavak Island and how it sits to the mainland, it looks like it's just been pulled right off, out a little ways into the sea. And this is how we believe that Nunavak Island got to be there, that whale pulling it out into the sea. Now finally that whale started to get tired, and finally it died. And so very, very carefully, that little boy, who was not so little anymore, he pulled that great big beluga whale up onto the beach. And then he went over and he took out his little harpoon, and he started going through all of the ceremonies and protocols that were necessary to make sure that the spirit of that big beluga whale knew how thankful he was, how happy he was, that it had decided to give its life to him so that he and his grandmother could survive. And after he went through all of those ceremonies and protocols, that's when he started to look at that big beluga whale. And the more he looked at that big beluga whale, the more he started to think to himself, I'm a professional. I'm to be treated with dignity and respect, and I'm sharing with you the deep, darkest nature of my core, which is to be respected and honored.
Wow.
He looked at that great... I mean, how do you know he's going to say... Maybe this time he's going to say, oh my gosh, bagosh, my gosh, osh, gosh, bagosh. It could happen. We're in Russia. Anything could happen. What they would say in Russia? Wow. He looked at that great big beluga whale and he thought to himself, wow. That big beluga whale there looks really good. Oh, I know that I should take this big beluga whale home and I should share it with my grandmother. I should share it with the entire village, but I'm still kind of hungry. Maybe if I ate this great big beluga whale, well, I could get even bigger and even stronger, and then I will bomb you all. And after that, I will become governor of California. You pigs aren't behind the times. We know what's going on out there. I mean, I'm the one that told you about Michael Jackson, remember? So he decided he would eat that great big beluga whale right then and there. And so he went over and he picked up that great big beluga whale. No hernias. I'm okay. Usually it's the kindergartner sitting up front and they're like, ah! I got her to do it. I rock. So we took that big beluga whale and oops. Better do it on this side. Oh, it's much louder on that side. Oh, that's a good idea. that big beluga whale, skin and bones, and ooh, he felt like he just finished Chocoholics buffet, which will be happening tomorrow night at 9:45. Now, eating a great big beluga whale. In order to fit all of that inside, he had to get even bigger and even... I'm not going to jump up. Last time I did that in Sweden 15 years ago, I got a scar on my nose because I hit the light. Really tall. And now as he walked along, his footsteps were even further apart, and they made these great big got-dome, got-dome, got-dome sounds as he walked along. Now, he knew he had to go out and get something even bigger and better to bring home to his grandmother, and that's about the time he realized that, you know, there just isn't much bigger and better than a whale that you can bring home to your grandmother. And he was starting to get